Before we begin today's story, if you're fascinated by World War II deception operations, intelligence work that changed the course of battles, and stories so bizarre they seem like spy fiction, except they're completely true, you need to subscribe to War Rewind right now. The operation you're about to hear remained classified for years. When it was finally revealed, people couldn't believe it actually happened. It's the story of how British intelligence used a corpse to fool Hitler. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Now let's talk about the man who never was. April 30th, 1943, off the coast of Huelva, Spain, Spanish fishermen spotted something floating in the water. A body. Face down. Military uniform. British officer by the look of it. They pulled the body from the ocean and brought it ashore. Local authorities were notified. The man appeared to have drowned. There was a briefcase chained to his wrist. Official-looking. Military documentation visible inside. His identification papers indicated he was Major William Martin, Royal Marines, recently assigned to Combined Operations Headquarters. Spain was neutral in World War II, officially, but everyone knew Spanish authorities had German sympathies. The government under Francisco Franco leaned toward the Axis powers. German intelligence operated relatively freely in Spain. The Spanish authorities did what protocol required. They notified the British embassy, informed them a British officer's body had been recovered. The British would want to claim their fallen servicemen, but the Spanish also did what the British expected they'd do. They examined the documents in the briefcase before returning them, and they shared information with German intelligence agents operating in Spain. German agents were very interested. A dead British officer, documents in his briefcase. This could be valuable intelligence. They photographed everything: the documents, the identification papers, the contents of his wallet, everything that might provide useful information. The documents appeared to be letters, official military correspondence, from Vice Admiral Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, to General Harold Alexander, commander of Allied forces in North Africa. High-level communication between senior Allied commanders. The letters discussed upcoming military operations, planning, logistics, and casually, almost in passing, they mentioned invasion plans. Allied landings in the Mediterranean. The letters indicated the target would be Greece and Sardinia. Sicily was mentioned, but only as a diversion. A feint to draw German attention while the real invasion happened elsewhere. The German agents sent their intelligence report to Berlin. This was significant. Advanced knowledge of Allied invasion plans. If genuine, this could allow Germany to position forces correctly, defend the actual invasion sites, potentially defeat the landings before the Allies established a beachhead. German intelligence analyzed everything carefully. Was this legitimate? Or was it planted disinformation? The British were clever. This could be a deception. They examined the body. A Spanish doctor performed an autopsy. The man had drowned. The physical evidence was consistent with someone who'd been in the water for several days after an aircraft went down in the channel. They analyzed the documents. The paper was correct. British military stationery. The seals appeared authentic. The signatures matched known examples of Mountbatten's and Alexander's handwriting. The content seemed consistent with how senior commanders would communicate. They looked at everything else found on the body. The wallet contained personal items, theater ticket stubs from London, receipts, a photograph of a young woman, love letters from a fiancée named Pam, a letter from the man's father, an overdraft notice from his bank. Everything you'd expect to find in a military officer's wallet. It all appeared genuine. The German intelligence assessment concluded these documents were authentic. This was real Allied correspondence. The invasion targets were Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. The intelligence report went to Adolf Hitler personally. Hitler studied it carefully. He'd been expecting an Allied invasion somewhere in the Mediterranean. The question was where. Sicily was the obvious choice, the closest point from North Africa to Italy. But these documents indicated otherwise. Hitler became convinced. The intelligence was too detailed, too mundane to be fabricated. The personal effects on the body added authenticity. This wasn't a clever fake. This was a genuine intelligence windfall from a dead British officer who'd been carrying sensitive documents he shouldn't have been carrying. Hitler issued orders. German forces would be reinforced in Greece and Sardinia. Those were the invasion targets. Sicily would be defended, but not as heavily. Resources would flow to Greece and Sardinia. German troops began moving away from Sicily toward what Hitler believed were the actual invasion sites. July 10, 1943, the Allied invasion came. At Sicily, Operation Husky, the largest amphibious operation to that point in history. Over 160,000 troops, 3,000 ships. They met resistance, but lighter than expected. German forces were present, but not concentrated as heavily as they could have been, because significant German forces were in Greece and Sardinia, waiting for an invasion that never came. Sicily fell in 38 days, faster than Allied planners had anticipated. Casualties were lower than pre-invasion estimates. The invasion was a success. And Major William Martin, the British officer whose body had been found off Spain? He never existed. There was no Major William Martin in the Royal Marines. The body was real, but the identity was completely fabricated. The documents were fake. The love letters were invented. The photograph of the fiancé was staged. Everything in that wallet had been carefully crafted to create the illusion of a complete person. British intelligence had used a corpse to deliver false invasion plans to Germany. They'd counted on Spanish authorities sharing intelligence with the Germans. They'd created an elaborate fake identity to make the deception believable. And Hitler had fallen for it completely. This is Operation Mincemeat, the story of how British intelligence created a fictional person, used human remains to deliver disinformation, fooled German intelligence, and contributed to the success of the Sicily invasion by causing Hitler to position his forces incorrectly. The story begins in late 1942. Allied leadership was planning the next major operation after North Africa. The strategic goal was getting into Europe, starting the liberation of occupied territory, beginning the long push toward Germany. The obvious target was Sicily. It made perfect sense strategically. It was the closest point from North Africa. It provided a stepping stone to mainland Italy. Capturing Sicily would open the Mediterranean to Allied shipping. It would put pressure on Italy, the weakest Axis partner. The problem was, Sicily was obvious. The Germans knew it was the logical target. They'd be expecting it. They'd fortified the island accordingly. German troops were positioned to defend against invasion. If the Allies invaded Sicily, they'd face heavy resistance. Casualties would be high. The operation might fail. Allied planners needed an advantage, some way to make the Sicily invasion less expected, less heavily defended. The ideal scenario would be making the Germans think the invasion was coming somewhere else, get them to move forces away from Sicily to defend targets that wouldn't actually be invaded. This required deception, making the Germans believe false intelligence. But how do you feed false intelligence to the enemy in a way they'll believe? The Germans weren't stupid. They'd be suspicious of any intelligence that seemed too convenient. British intelligence had experience with deception operations. They'd successfully deceived the Germans multiple times. But this needed to be especially convincing. The stakes were too high. Thousands of lives depended on reducing the defenses at Sicily. Someone proposed an audacious idea. What if they could get false documents into German hands? Documents that appeared to be genuine Allied military correspondence discussing invasion plans? If the Germans found such documents and believed they were real, they'd act on the information. But how do you get documents to the Germans in a way that seems accidental and legitimate? You can't just leave them somewhere obvious. That would be suspicious. The solution was macabre. Use a body. Make it appear that a British courier officer died in an accident. Aircraft crashed into the sea and washed ashore with documents still on him. The Germans would find the body, examine the documents, and potentially believe they'd stumbled onto real intelligence through pure chance. This idea had precedent. In World War I, similar deceptions using bodies had been attempted with mixed success. But this would need to be much more sophisticated, more thorough, more convincing. The operation was given a code name: Operation Mincemeat. The name referred to the corpse. Grim humor typical of intelligence work. The first challenge was obtaining a body. They needed someone who'd died recently. The body needed to be in condition consistent with drowning after an aircraft accident. This was delicate, ethically complex. Using human remains for military deception raises serious moral questions. British intelligence contacted coroners, explained they needed a body for important war purposes, couldn't provide details. Most families, when approached, declined. Understandably, the idea of a loved one's remains being used this way was disturbing. Eventually, they found a suitable body. A man named Glinder Michael. He'd died in London. Homeless. Died from rat poison, though whether accidental or intentional was unclear. He had no close family to object. The circumstances of his death could potentially be disguised as drowning if the body was handled correctly. The body was preserved in a morgue, kept cold to prevent decomposition. Meanwhile, the team began creating Major William Martin. This was the crucial part. The deception had to be thorough. If German intelligence examined the body and found anything suspicious, the entire operation would fail. Worse, it might alert the Germans that the real target was Sicily after all. They created a complete identity. Major William Martin, Royal Marines, assigned to Combined Operations Headquarters. The name was chosen carefully. William Martin was common enough that if Germans tried to verify the name against military records, they'd find other William Martins serving in various capacities. Nothing about the name would seem immediately suspicious. They created a backstory. Martin was engaged to be married. His fiancée was named Pam. They were in love, planning their future together. He'd recently purchased an engagement ring, had theater tickets for shows in London, lived a normal life for a military officer in wartime. The team wrote love letters, from Pam to William, affectionate, personal, the kind of letters a real couple would write. They addressed him by pet names, discussed their relationship, mentioned mundane details that made the letters feel authentic. They found a photograph, a young woman to play Pam, actually a secretary working for British intelligence. She posed for a photograph looking romantic and slightly wistful, the kind of photograph a soldier would carry of his fiancée. They created additional documents for his wallet, a stern letter from his father, slightly disappointed in William's romantic choices, but loving nonetheless. An overdraft notice from his bank. Martin was slightly over his limit. Financial troubles. Normal for someone trying to afford an engagement ring on military pay. They added receipts. Ticket stubs from a recent West End show. A bill from a jeweler for the engagement ring. £40. Not trivial amount for 1943. They even added keys. House keys. Office keys. The kind of items someone would have in their pockets. Everything to make the identity feel lived in. Real. Then came the critical documents. The fake military correspondence. This had to be perfect. It had to look authentic. Sound authentic. Contain information that was plausible enough that Germans would believe it, but false enough to misdirect them. They drafted a letter from Vice Admiral Louis Mountbatten to General Harold Alexander. Mountbatten was Chief of Combined Operations. Alexander commanded Allied forces in North Africa. Communication between them would be expected and normal. The letter's tone was casual, not formally discussing invasion plans, but mentioning them in passing, making references that would make sense to senior commanders, but might seem like careless inclusion of sensitive information in correspondence. The letter mentioned operations in Greece and Sardinia, referenced preparations, logistics, buildup of forces. Sicily was mentioned, but only as a cover operation. A feint to draw German attention while the real invasions happened elsewhere. This reverse psychology was clever. If the letter had ignored Sicily entirely, Germans might have suspected deception. But mentioning Sicily as a deliberate diversion made the Greece and Sardinia targets seem more credible. They created additional documents. A letter of introduction for Martin, recommending him to another officer. Standard military paperwork. The kind of thing an officer might be carrying if traveling to a new assignment. Everything was prepared on genuine British military stationery, proper paper, correct watermarks, authentic seals. They even made sure the wear on the documents was consistent with items that had been carried in a briefcase for a few days, then submerged in salt water. The briefcase was chosen carefully. Standard military issue, not too new, not too worn, exactly what a mid-level staff officer would carry. They chained it to the body's wrist. Standard security procedure for couriers carrying sensitive documents. They dressed the body in a proper Royal Marine uniform, correct insignia, appropriate rank markers, military identification tags around the neck with Martin's fake identity information. Finally, they had to deploy the body. The location was critical. It needed to be somewhere the body would be found, somewhere Spanish authorities would handle it and potentially share information with Germans. But it also needed to appear as a plausible location for an aircraft crash. They chose the coast near Huelva, Spain, southern Spain. It was plausible that an aircraft flying from Britain to North Africa might go down in that area. The currents and tides would carry a body from a crash site to shore near Huelva. Spanish authorities there were known to cooperate with German intelligence. April 19, 1943. The British submarine HMS Seraph carried the body. The submarine surfaced off the Spanish coast near Huelva late at night. The crew brought the body on deck. They placed the body in the water carefully, positioned it to float naturally, made sure the briefcase was secure, said a brief prayer. The crew felt uncomfortable with this. Using human remains this way troubled many of them, but they understood the importance. The submarine submerged and departed. The body floated toward shore, carried by currents. By morning, Spanish fishermen would find it. The next phase was waiting and monitoring. British intelligence had ways of knowing what Spanish authorities were doing. They had sources in Spain. They could observe without being obvious about it. The body was found as expected. Spanish authorities examined it, notified the British embassy, but they also examined the documents carefully. And they shared information with German agents in Huelva. British intelligence monitored German communications through Ultra, the code-breaking program that had cracked German Enigma encryption. They could read German military messages. They watched to see if Germans were taking the bait. The first German intelligence reports were cautious, describing the documents, noting the circumstances, recommending further analysis. The documents had reached German intelligence. Now the question was whether they'd believe them. More reports followed. German intelligence was taking this seriously. They were analyzing everything: the body, the documents, the personal effects, trying to determine authenticity. British intelligence read these German messages with anxiety. If Germans concluded it was a deception, the operation failed. Worse, it might confirm for Germans that Sicily was the real target. Then came the assessment. German intelligence concluded the documents were genuine. They found no evidence of deception. Everything checked out. The body appeared to be a genuinely drowned British officer who'd been carrying documents he shouldn't have been carrying. The intelligence went to Hitler. He reviewed it personally, and he believed it. Greece and Sardinia were the targets. Sicily was the diversion. Orders went out. German forces would reinforce Greece, strengthen Sardinia. Sicily would be defended, but not as the primary focus. British intelligence watched German troop movements through various intelligence sources, including ultra-decrypts. They could see Germans moving forces exactly as hoped. The deception was working, but they couldn't celebrate yet. The real test would come with the actual invasion. If the Sicily defenses were lighter than expected, if casualties were lower, if the invasion succeeded more easily, that would prove Operation Mincemeat had worked. July 10th, Operation Husky launched, the Sicily invasion, the largest amphibious operation attempted to that point. Over 160,000 Allied troops, 3,000 ships and landing craft. They hit the beaches, met resistance, but not as heavy as feared. German forces were present, fighting hard, but not concentrated in the overwhelming numbers that could have been there if Hitler hadn't diverted troops to Greece and Sardinia. The invasion succeeded. Within days, Allied forces established solid beachheads. Within weeks, they controlled significant portions of the island. By August 17th, just 38 days after landing, Sicily was secured. Military historians later estimated Operation Mincemeat saved thousands of Allied lives, perhaps tens of thousands. By causing Germans to misposition their forces, the deception reduced resistance at the actual landing sites. Soldiers who might have died facing heavier defenses survived. The operation remained classified for years after the war. The public didn't know about Operation Mincemeat. The details were military secrets, methods and techniques British intelligence might want to use again. But in 1953, the story became public. Ewan Montague, one of the British intelligence officers who'd planned Operation Mincemeat, published a book, The Man Who Never Was. Detailed account of the operation, how they'd done it, why it worked. The book was a sensation. People were amazed. This had actually happened? British intelligence had used a corpse to fool Hitler? Created a complete fake identity? Written love letters to make a fictional person seem real? A film was made in 1956, also called The Man Who Never Was. Documentary-style dramatization. The operation captured public imagination. It seemed like something from a spy novel. Except it was true. For decades, one detail remained uncertain. Who was the body? Montague's book didn't identify the person whose remains were used, said only that it was someone who died whose family had given permission. Implied the family wanted privacy. This led to speculation. Various theories. Some people claimed to know who it was. Investigations happened periodically. Researchers trying to identify the real person behind Major William Martin. Finally, in the 1990s, the truth emerged. Through research and declassified records, the body was Glyndwr Michael, the homeless man who died from rat poison. His identity was confirmed through various records and investigations. Some controversy followed. Michael had been homeless, vulnerable. Had anyone truly given informed consent to use his remains this way? Or had authorities simply taken a body they could take because no one would object? The ethics remain complicated. Operation Mincemeat saved lives. Probably thousands of lives. The deception contributed to Allied victory in Sicily, which contributed to eventual defeat of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The ends were crucial to defeating genuine evil. But the means involved using a human corpse as a prop in a deception operation. Without the person's consent while living. Is that justified even for good outcomes? There's no simple answer. War creates moral complexity. Operations Mincemeat exists in that complexity. It worked. It saved lives. It helped win the war. But it also involved using someone's remains in ways they never agreed to, while alive. Glyndwr Michael is buried in Spain, in Huelva, the cemetery where the body was interred after the operation. For years, the gravestone read, Major William Martin, maintaining the deception even in death. Later, after the truth was known, the gravestone was updated. It now acknowledges his real identity, Glyndwr Michael, his actual name. Recognition that a real person was behind the fictional officer. Operation Mincemeat is studied in military academies, intelligence agencies. It's considered one of the most successful deception operations in military history. Everything worked. The Germans believed completely. They acted on the false intelligence exactly as hoped. The real operation benefited enormously. The success came from attention to detail, the love letters, the photograph of Pam, the theater tickets, the overdraft notice, every small element that made Major William Martin feel like a real person. That's what sold the deception. Not just the fake military documents, but the complete fictional identity. This illustrated an important principle. Successful deception requires thoroughness. You can't just fake the obvious elements. You have to think about everything. What would really be in someone's wallet? What letters would they carry? What financial troubles might they have? What keys would be in their pocket? The Germans were professional intelligence analysts. They looked for inconsistencies. They tried to find flaws in the story. The reason they didn't find flaws is because British intelligence had thought of everything, made sure every detail supported every other detail. The operation also required understanding the enemy, knowing what Germans would find believable, what would seem suspicious. The decision to mention Sicily as a diversion was brilliant. It made the Greece and Sardinia information more credible by acknowledging Sicily in a way that explained why it wasn't the real target. And the operation required patience. They couldn't rush. Had to create a complete identity. Write convincing letters. Find the right body. Choose the right deployment location. Wait for Germans to find it, analyze it, believe it. Modern militaries still study Operation Mincemeat. Not because they'd replicate it exactly, modern intelligence work is different, but because the principles remain relevant. deception requires thoroughness, attention to detail, understanding your adversary, patience. In 2021, another film was made, Operation Mincemeat, starring Colin Firth. More comprehensive than the 1956 film, explored the people behind the operation, the planning, the moral complexity, the risks. The renewed attention introduced Operation Mincemeat to a new generation. People who hadn't known about this operation learned about it. The story remains remarkable. Even 80 years later, it seems almost unbelievable. Yet it happened. Hitler was fooled by love letters written to a man who never existed, by a photograph of a woman posing as a fiancée, by theater tickets and bank notices carefully placed in a wallet, by attention to human detail that made a corpse seem like a person. German intelligence was skilled, professional, thorough. They didn't want to be deceived. They analyzed carefully. They looked for inconsistencies. They tried to verify. And they still believed because the deception was that good. Thousands of Allied soldiers who landed in Sicily never knew their invasion was less costly because of a homeless man's body and fake love letters. They fought. Many died anyway. War is brutal, regardless of deception operations. But more survived. More came home. Because Hitler's forces were in the wrong place. That's Operation Mincemeat. The corpse that fooled Hitler. The fake identity that seemed real. The love letters that never were written to anyone real. The operation that saved thousands of lives through morbid creativity and obsessive attention to detail. The man who never was helped win a battle, helped shorten the war, helped defeat fascism, even though he never existed. April 30th, 1943. A body floated ashore in Spain. British military officer. Documents in his briefcase. Letters from senior commanders discussing invasion plans. German intelligence analyzed everything, concluded the documents were genuine, advised Hitler accordingly. Hitler believed it. Ordered German forces to reinforce Greece and Sardinia. July 10th. Allied invasion came at Sicily, not Greece, not Sardinia. The Germans had been fooled completely. The British officer whose body was found didn't exist. Major William Martin was a fictional identity created by British intelligence. The body was real, a homeless man named Glyndwr Michael who died in London. But everything else was fabricated. The love letters from his fiancée, Pam, written by intelligence officers. The photograph? Staged. The theater tickets? Planted. The bank overdraft notice? Created for authenticity. Everything in that wallet was carefully designed to make a fictional person seem real. Hitler fell for it because the deception was thorough. Not just fake documents, but a complete fake identity. Every detail thought through. Every element supporting every other element. Operation Mincemeat saved thousands of Allied lives. The Sicily invasion succeeded partly because German forces were positioned incorrectly, defending beaches that were never invaded, believing false intelligence delivered by a corpse. It's one of the most successful deception operations in military history, and one of the strangest. British intelligence used human remains to deliver disinformation, created a fake person who seemed real enough to fool Hitler. If this story amazed you, if you're stunned that this actually happened and wasn't spy fiction, you need to subscribe to War Rewind right now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We cover the operations that seem impossible but were real, the deceptions that changed battles, the stories that sound like movies but actually happened. Operation Mincemeat is one of many.